Praise the name of the Lord. I greet you well with the greeting of peace to the people of God. Shalom Aleichem. Today is in fact Ascension Sunday, 40 days since the resurrection having been completed during this week, this Sunday closest to the Ascension. And it is in fact because of the reality of the Ascension that this same Jesus, whom you see taken up into the clouds, in like manner will return. So said the angels to a puzzled, bewildered group of disciples as they had just witnessed the resurrected Lord taken up before them. Because he is ascended, he is coming back so that where he is, we may be also. Thank you very much, choir. I noticed that I, according to the clock, only have 5 minutes to say much to you. So I'm going to take some seconds out of that to bring special greetings in the absence to my dear friends, Reverend and Mrs. Cahoon, to greet Sister Margaret, a lady whom I respect tremendously, and I think I would want to commend her publicly this morning for the tremendous work that she's doing here, along with Elder Beersing, my dear friend, Reverend Stephen? Elder Stephen Rooms, perhaps who will one day be rightly titled Reverend. Who knows? And, of course, to take speaker's privilege and add to the welcome, to say special welcome to Mrs. Latoya Jones. Praise the Lord. Andrew and Donette, my dear friends from JTS and Renewed Ministries, I salute you on God's work in your life. Andrew was teasing me about having gone to the parish of Portland and found a special someone. Turn with me to Matthew chapter 19. Verses 13 to 15. And then if you'd be so kind as to, after that, to return to this 2 Samuel 9 text that our young friends so ably read for us. I want to also say how delighted I was to see the partnership of father and son leading the service this morning. It is extremely commendable. And if it was done especially today for what's happening today, I would strongly recommend that you continue in that vein. Matthew 19:13. Then little children were brought to Jesus for him to place his hands on them and pray for them. But the disciples rebuked those who brought them. Jesus said, "Let the little children come to me, and do not hinder them, for the kingdom of heaven belongs to such as these." When he had placed his hands on them, he went on from there. The word of the Lord. Passionately pursuing the care of the vulnerable. Data from the Statistical Institute of Jamaica indicate that at the latest count, updated May 2012, overall 69% of Jamaicans are 40 years and under. 36% are 19 and under. That's roughly about 4 out of every 10 Jamaicans, 19 and under. The largest percentage falls within the 10 to 14 age bracket, while the third largest section of the population is in the 5 to 9 category. Whichever way we look at these statistics, children account for an extremely significant section of our population. On this past Friday, the children's advocate Dan Gordon Harrison called for the names of sex offenders to be publicized in an effort to curb the crime, especially against children. She made the call against reports of more than 1,000 cases of sexual abuse of minors in April 2012 alone. Recently also the news saw the head of Sissoka indicating that she really wishes to be able to name the names of the high-profile Jamaican men who are perpetrators of this. The children's advocate said, I quote, "I have had the privilege to sit in on a counseling session involving convicted sex offenders. And when you look into their eyes and listen to some of the things they say, it sends chills down your spine." She related the startling revelation by one of the offenders that he generally preyed on children from ages 3 to 7. He said that he did that, quote, because people would be very slow to believe them. And even if people believed them and it led to a charge, the judge would never buy their evidence because he had a way of staring at them and intimidating them so that the child begins to stutter and the child would start to appear as if he or she is no longer credible. She related. According to Gordon Harrison, there were more than 10,000 cases of sexual abuse against children between 2007 and 2011. Children as young as 4 years old have been treated for gonorrhea, syphilis, herpes, and HIV at the Bustamante Hospital for Children after being raped by close family members, including their fathers. Dr. Sandra A. Knight, a general practitioner who has worked with the pediatric hospital in Kingston for the past 11 years, said, more of these young patients are being brought in for sexually transmitted infections. The hospital sees several alleged sexual assault cases each year, with the victims being anywhere from babies to 12 years old. If you can find that entire article from The Observer, perhaps put in Dr. Sandra A. Knight. I don't quite remember which date it came out, but it was in the week leading up to Good Friday. And I took the liberty of reading the entire article at Shalom on Good Friday. And in the article, it's not for the faint-hearted, for Dr. Knight goes into graphic and vivid detail of the condition of the genitalia and the posterior parts of those children. And the one that hits me like a brick between the eyes is one she reported where the perpetrator had been a boy, the victim a young boy, and the perpetrator a pastor, a pastor. The protection of Jamaican children from violence, abuse, and exploitation in all its forms is one of the biggest challenges facing the nation. The high rate of crime and violence plaguing the Jamaican society has had a devastating impact on children. Between 2006 and October 2009, over 5,600 persons were murdered in Jamaica. From 2006 to 2008, 230 children under age 17 were murdered. According to Ministry of Health data, in 2007 and 2008, over 11,100 cases of sexual assault, stab wounds, gunshots, or blunt force injury were treated in emergency rooms across the island's hospitals among persons aged 0 to 19. That means 17 children and adolescents were treated for violence-related injuries every day for 2 years. Sexual crimes against children are rampant, with girls primarily the victims. In 2006, children and adolescents made up an alarming 78% of all the sexual assault and rape cases admitted to public hospitals. In the same year, girls under 17 accounted for 32% of all sexual assaults in Jamaica. You will find this on the UNICEF website. In 2010, Market Research Services conducted research on behalf of UNICEF and the Ministry of Education. They surveyed 1,000 people from varying socioeconomic strata of the society and found that 40% of those surveyed supported corporal punishment. Of those, 31.2% believed that corporal punishment included hitting on the head, pinching, conking, burning, or being made to kneel on sharp objects. So it's one thing to have 40% supporting corporal punishment. But among those, 1/3 defined corporal punishment in very violent terms. The sociologists and the psychologists tell us that abused children are 25% more likely to experience teen pregnancy. Abused teens are less likely to practice safe sex, putting them at greater risk for STIs. Except in the minds of the most callous and apathetic among us, it should be painfully obvious that there is a generation of children and youth whose vision of their lives is myopic due to wrong mindsets and attitudes built up over the years through negative influences, poor parenting, lack of emotional support, through positive role models, and fragmented communities with the constant threat of crime and violence. And even with the existing interventions, there is insufficient focus on character development and values that which lends itself to a growing moral decay amongst children and youth. Due to these circumstances, an alarming number of youth under the age of 16 years in all communities may be labeled as at risk of dropping out of school and or engaging in deviant behavior, having poor academic performance, aggression, and antisocial tendencies, plus a general lack of motivation. If we fail to address their need for support and empowerment, the result will be an endemic of hopelessness, increased violence, and criminal activity. In addition, they will have typically no real sense of human and social responsibility, as well as abbreviated lifespans. Yet, as obvious and disturbing as these realities are, the Church of Jesus Christ, for the most part, pays scant regard to the issues surrounding children on a whole, and pay what is tantamount to lip service to intentional children's ministry. To be fair, there are some churches that do have some form of ministry to children, and for this we are eternally grateful. But truth be told, what obtains more often than not may best be likened as the trawling form of fishing. We're trawling, meaning that the boat is moving slowly ahead, dragging behind it a hook in the hope that some hapless fish will come across it. To me, trawling is a bit like discharging a shotgun out your kitchen window, hoping that you will hit a chicken. The scattershot approach to ministry may have worked in a time of ministry past, but it will not cut it given the rapidly changing landscape of the context in which the church now has to do ministry. What is the context of ministry that now faces the church? Well, for one, the context is one where the church no longer enjoys the position of privilege that it once held as the hallmark and the defining mark for guidance on moral matters in the society. Our society has quickly become a secular society. A culture shift has taken place under the quiet that has resulted in a great disengagement. What do I mean by that? I mean that a generation has grown up and is growing up which is not a church-going generation. No longer do persons consider it, persons in the wider society I'm talking about, and perhaps even among the churched, no longer is it considered important for children to be at Sabbath and Sunday school. Leading naturally to a growing prevalence of biblical illiteracy. What is this biblical illiteracy? It expresses itself in the question, really? You mean that's in the Bible? So that you say to children these days, you remember the story of David and Goliath, and they will ask you, David and Goliath who? My own experience across the schools of Jamaica has borne this out. And it hit me most painfully recently as this past Easter. We had an engagement out on the streets. We had received a donation of some bun and cheese from the Kiwanis Club. But we wanted to make sure that we were not just distributing the bun and cheese that the Kiwanis had provided. So we took the opportunity to engage the children of the community around the death, burial, and resurrection of Jesus. And it was not a surprise to me, but again, it hit me. Not one of the children of the community could tell us what Easter was about apart from bun and cheese. Only our Sunday school students could say that it was about Jesus dying on the cross and Jesus being raised from the dead. For some time, I had thought that at least it was still happening in the schools. It is now painfully obvious to me that apparently it is not happening in the schools. With this picture painted before us, I borrowed the title from Chuck Colson and Nancy Pearson's book to challenge us today. The book, How Now Shall We Live? Can it be business as usual? Can the Church of Jesus afford to conduct ministry as business as usual? And I say to us, absolutely not, unless we intend to continue on the path that we are currently on, which has clearly marked death ahead. And so I want to use the two texts that were read as a backdrop to challenge us a little bit. In the case of Jesus and the disciples, recorded for us in the three synoptic gospels, Matthew, Mark, and Luke, all three of them record it. And that, to me, suggests that they considered it an extremely important account of all the happenings that Jesus engaged in, so that all three of them included it in their gospels. The day when the parents brought the children to Jesus for him to bless them. In the case of the disciples who earned the wrath of Jesus, on that particular day, it was certainly not business as usual as far as Jesus was concerned. As far as the disciples were concerned, it should have been business as usual. For in the normal course of things, it was a culture that made no provision for children. It was a culture in which children were not considered in the course of planning. It was a culture in which they were not even referred to when it was time to number a group, as were the women not included in the numbering. You read, for example, of the accounts of the feeding of the multitude, and you will note that it said 5,000 men. The more modern translations, in an attempt to be politically correct, may have 5,000 people. And some have added 5,000 men with women and children, or plus women and children. But to be true to the history of Jesus' day, in numbering a crowd, you counted the number of males. Children were not counted. Women were not counted. And so, on this particular day, even the disciples of Jesus drove the children away. The disciples considered them a nuisance. They considered them as agenda disruptors. You women, you pesky women, you nosy women, can't you see that the rabbi is in full flight, teaching and preaching and healing? Go away. What was Jesus' response? It's one of those occasions where the scripture records Jesus in his humanity and in his divinity exhibiting righteous indignation. Jesus became vividly and visibly upset at the disciples. He became indignant. In our culture, we live by the principle children must be seen and not heard. Yes, the principle still remains. In our culture, we see them and consider them as easily dismissible. Both in Jesus' time and in our time, it was the view that anything done to them would not have any long-term consequences. Anything we say to them, whatever we do to them, does not matter. It does not have any eternal consequences. But who remembers what Jesus had to say about anyone who causes one of his little ones to stumble? It would be better for him, Jesus says, in comparison to the wrath that shall be poured out upon him, it would be better that he ties a millstone around his neck and chuck off Kingston Wharf. Because what is done and said to them has long-term and eternal consequences. In Matthew's previous chapter, Jesus uses a child as the model of kingdom readiness. Unless you become as a little child, you cannot enter the kingdom. The parents were bringing the children to Jesus for him to impart unto them the gift of the blessing. They wanted Jesus as the rabbi to continue in the tradition of the patriotic fathers that we see Jacob, Israel, doing for his 12 sons upon his deathbed, where you lay your hand upon them and pronounce a prophetic prayer of blessing upon their life. So I always take time to say to parents when they come with their babies to be christened, I say, look, we don't christen babies. That is a Roman Catholic Church concept. The child must grow to the age of reason and choose to become a Christian. But what we do is to pronounce a blessing of dedication upon that baby. That's what the parents wanted Jesus to do. But the structure, the organizational structure, did not allow for that to happen as far as Jesus saw. So he took the time. Read it carefully. I like Matthew's version, because Matthew's version brings out the point that he prayed for them individually. When he had placed his hands on them, he left the place. We don't know how many children were brought to Jesus that day. Whether it was 10 or whether it was 200, Jesus gave them individual attention. For Jesus, this was a leisurely time of ministry. This was not something to be hurried. This was not something to breeze through so that we could get on with the order of business. This was, on that occasion, the business. Jesus demonstrates that they must Children must occupy an intentional part of how we plan and what we do, not an appendage, not an afterthought. Those who are engaged in the ministry of Sunday school and Christian education, as far as I'm concerned, moving from the example of Jesus, your role is equally important as the pastor or the speaker who will stand behind this pulpit and deliver the word. Your anointing is equally important and ought to be treated as such. Your preparation and your seeking the face of the Lord must be equal to those who will stand behind this pulpit and preach. It cannot be that when you arrive for class, you pull out the Sunday school book and you find the page for today's lesson. It cannot be that you just find a passage and say, this is today's lesson. No, you must be intentional. The old wise folks say, the hands that rock the cradle rule the world. If it is that we agree that parenting is failing in the society, where else but in the church, where we have them, should not the cradle be rocked? And then the story from the Old Testament. David and Mephibosheth. And our young friends did so well with that funny name. A little known story in the Old Testament. How is it that this story in the life of David is not as well known as the 2 Samuel 12 story, where he failed colossally with Uriah's wife? A little nondescript story, hidden as it were among the annals of the kings. David and Mephibosheth. Is there anyone else that I can be a blessing to? Is the essence of the text. Read the text carefully when you get a chance. The background, the prelude. You know, David being anointed king, having to wait in the backside of the wilderness while Saul reigned and Saul failed, and David would come in with a great battle against Goliath, and the strong bond of friendship, mutual, solid, holy, male-to-male friendship between David and Goliath that some evil men are now trying to corrupt and use as an example and model an excuse for their behavior. I'm talking about a man-to-man, a real man-to-man, iron sharpening iron friendship between David and Jonathan. So that David could say without any homosexual intent, my love for Jonathan exceeds my love for women. My friend Jonathan, my friend David, my brethren. Saul is killed in battle. His son Jonathan, David's friend, is killed in battle. And before Jonathan dies, he has a son by the name of Mephibosheth. And during one of the wars, in an attempt to save his life, the child's nurse has taken him up, and she's running with him to safety, and she trips, and the baby goes flying through the air and drops. And as a result of the fall, he is crippled in both legs. And somehow, with the passage of time, the boy gets forgotten. The boy gets lost. And it would seem as if David, because of his pledge to show kindness, his kindness, his friendship with Jonathan, outlived Jonathan. David had said, I will forever show kindness and mercy to the household of Jonathan. And it would seem, you get the impression from the text, that David had made it a habitual duty to seek out the household of Jonathan. But bear in mind that Jonathan's father, Saul, had relentlessly pursued David to kill him to the day of Saul's death. Just hold that intention. David comes and he says, is there no one left from the household of Saul that I can show kindness to? From the household of my enemy. Not so much because I consider him an enemy, but I was his enemy. From the household of him who required my hurt. From him who had risen up against me. Is there anyone else that I can show kindness to? How many of us have that disposition? How many of us do an act of kindness, an act of benevolence, hurriedly, so that we can pat ourselves on the back? At least I've done my one good deed for the day. Or do we, like David, after we have blessed that one, look around, scan the crowd, examine, seek out one more to bless? Is there anyone else that I can be a blessing to? So the boy gets lost in the kingdom. And David asks the question. One of Saul's servants, Ziba, says, yes, there is a son of Jonathan, but he is crippled in both legs. Ziba defined the boy by his limitation. Ziba would not even pronounce the boy's name. One of the rights of every child, according to the International Convention on the Rights of Children, is that every child has a right to a name. So do you begin to see the problem when so much of our children do not bear their father's name? I don't bear my father's name. And because of all the issues, I'm kind of glad I don't. For one, I don't like his last name, which is not his own father's name. So if the situation was to be corrected, I would have been Teddy Williams and not Teddy Jones. But Ziba does not even call the boy's name. It is way down in the text that we learn the child's name. There is another one, a son of Jonathan, but he is crippled in his feet. It was a culture in which lame persons were considered as less than human. Not just lame. If you had any kind of physical defect, you were ranked somewhere in the minus category. You don't even start at zero. You're somewhere below the zero bar. How many of us define children and the vulnerable by their limitations and not by the uncontestable fact that they, like us, are image bearers of the living God. He is lame in both feet. You see, Ziba seemed to be suggesting that the boy was unworthy of David's kindness. Is there anyone left of Saul's family that I can bless and show kindness to? Well, yes, there is a son of Jonathan, but he is lame in both feet. How is it that in all of David's previous actions of being kind to Saul's descendants, that that Mephibosheth was not brought forward? Had it not been for David's insistence, look, I don't care where they are in the kingdom, as long as they are a descendant of Saul, I want to be kind to them. Mephibosheth was a prince, the son of the king. But where is he? In some nondescript place named Lodebar, being taken care of by some man, not by the servants of Saul. What's the text? The servants of Saul ought to have been the ones taking care of Mephibosheth. But he's somewhere else being cared for by another man. Why? What is his crime? What has he done? His only crime is that he's lame in the foot. Not even for something that he himself had done. How many of us would equally join the fireborn bandwagon against that boy who is confused as to whether he is male or female, because when he was a little boy, he was sexually molested by a man? How many of us would say, I could not care less? From you gone that way in a business. Whose fault is it, really? That lady that we pass, that little girl who is dancing on a pole in a bar somewhere in Mandeville, who we have seen on the Ananda alerts, whose fault is it that she is there? Could it be that she is like a Mephibosheth, passionately pursuing the care of the vulnerable? Over and over again in his ministry, Jesus was accused of spending too much time, an inordinate amount of time, with the wrong crowd as far as the religious establishment was concerned. But as far as he was concerned, they were his crowd. Those were the ones that he felt most comfortable among. The vulnerable, the most vulnerable, the scum of society, the ones on the fringes, the ones for whom, against whom society is comfortable to turn up their noses. David recognized that Mephibosheth had lost his dignity. In whichever version you read the story, it is chilling when you get to the point where the boy is brought into David's presence. He's in the presence of royalty, and David declares his intentions. I made a vow to be kind to the household of Jonathan, and I will show kindness to you. Listen to Mephibosheth. Who am I that my servant the king would show kindness to me, a dead dog? Some versions say a stray dog. You know those dogs that have mange? Or when you're on the highway and you see a dead dog, It is on its back with its 4 feet up in the air that you don't even want your tires to rush. That's how the boy considered himself. You talk about low self-esteem? That's no self-esteem. He did not even consider himself a human. So that's no self-esteem. I am a dead dog. I am a stray dog. I am a nobody. I have no dignity. We sing, we are one in the Spirit, we are one in the Lord. And my favorite line is, we will guard each man's dignity and save each man's pride. That, to me, is the work of the church, the redeeming work of the church of Jesus Christ. And let me hurry on. David, you see, David was a man who was characterized by going beyond the ordinary. You remember when he wanted to sacrifice and he bought the threshing floor of Aruna. And Aruna said, take it and offer to the Lord. David says, no, I will not offer sacrifice to God of that which costs me nothing. The place of ministry in the comfort zone has long come to an end. We must be willing to roll up our sleeves and stare the ugliness in our society, to get down inside the belly of the beast and face it, sacrificing all, because we will not do unto God that which cost us nothing. When his soldiers heard him long for waters from the wells of Jerusalem, and they broke through enemy lines back and forth and brought him the water, he poured it as a drink offering to the Lord. These men risked their blood to get me this water. I will not drink it, I will pour it out to the Lord. Is there anyone else that I can show kindness to? Going above and beyond. This was not his child. It was the child descended from his sworn enemy. The child's own biological family had failed him colossally. How is it that Saul's descendants and his servants had ignored Mephibosheth for so long? When their parents fail them, who will take care of them? Lottie and I were in Content Clarendon yesterday at a youth convention. And towards the end, I saw this little boy, dirty and raggedy. He was walking past and he stared at me and he held my stare, and there was something about his eyes. Usually children tend to be shy, and if you hold their stare, they will look away. He stared at me all the way to his seat, and as soon as the program ended, he came back and stood there, and I said, my youth, you're right, you behave yourself, everything good. And he just stood by my side until he got a chance, and he whispered, sir, you can give me $100 please for carry school go Monday for my lunch. And as I probed, I saw 2 other girls looking likewise disheveled and dirty. And I said, that's your sister? I said, yes, sir. She's 8. And that's my other sister. She's 16. So I said, where's your mommy? And the middle child said, oh, mommy run we left with father when him was 1. That's the little one who is now 8. And they live with their dad. And as I inquired, they said that they come to the church every Saturday for, I don't remember what they call it, their children's ministry. But it was a youth convention. And drinks and food was on sale. And the little boy stayed by the car until I was able to give them money to go and get lunch. And I thought to myself, what if we were not here today? Would they have eaten? Would to God that someone there would have noticed them? think that they would have eaten. Because you see, it's possible for us to see and not to see. We take care of our own. And perhaps a sister or a cousin or somebody in the bloodline's child. But here David challenging us to go a little bit beyond. David restored his dignity. David said, as of today, you will eat at my table. Oh, no longer in Lodibar, but you will eat at the king's table. Is this not the invitation of Jesus? To the hungry and the weary, come and dine. As of now, Saul's servants, whose duty it was to look after Saul's family. The land that belongs to Saul, it's your land. Oh, we talk about the year of Jubilee, the restoring of the land to its previous owner. They will farm your land and they will bring the fruit of the land so that you can have food. But you will eat at the king's table. David restored his dignity. You are a person. You are a human being. You bear the image of God. You are royalty. Broken legs or not, but the royal blood of King Saul runs in your veins. Damaged psyche or not, physically abused or not, sexually abused or not, but you are a girl, you are a woman of beauty, you are a woman of purity. David not only brought back Mephibosheth's dignity, but because of David's actions, something that is so important to every male's psyche was restored to Mephibosheth. The text leaves out the details, but it is obvious that Mephibosheth went on to get a girl, to enjoy the pleasures of that beautiful thing that God created, and to get a son, to be able to continue his posterity. I don't know how he managed with both legs being crippled, but the text says, and he bore a son. Written off, castigated by society, but one man's actions brings a crown of dignity and glory to the young boy, so that Jonathan's name was carried on. A beautiful story. I call us today, I challenge us. In view of these, I'm just going to mention the three challenges. Some other time we'll develop them. That we seize every opportunity to share the vision of the importance of children's ministry. Eat it, breathe it, sleep it. The population is predominantly youth and child. The ministry of the church must therefore mirror that reality. Intentionally so. We must reflect it in our budget. We must reflect it in our planning. Our meetings must occupy our minds, seeking to come face to face with the realities of the society and the challenges that they face. Our preaching, our teaching, our Bible study, our singing, our praise songs must reflect our awareness of the importance of children's ministry. Secondly, the second challenge is that the church needs to be the forerunner on issues of justice for children. Bless God for the Normans with passion and purity. Bless God for the blazing work of Sister Mary Clark, former children's advocate, and people like her Honor Paula Blake Powell, and people like Betty and Blaine, who are blazing the trail. But the Church of Jesus must stand in support of their work. When the rallies are called, we must take time, set aside our agenda, forget going to the movies, lay aside the shopping for a while, and stand with them and let our voices be heard. Where we know of children being abused, we must be true to the word that the righteous are as bold as lions. And it could be the Don who is abusing them. We will report it and we will speak out. Pastor, you can't stay there. After me now I'm dead. I hear Jesus. I heard a word in Proverbs 31, right before the famous woman of virtue text. It calls the people of God, stand up, talk for the poor, speak up for the needy and the vulnerable. Be the voice of those who have no voice. And finally, my final challenge. Breathe, sleep, focus on children's ministry. Be a forerunner on issues of justice. And then challenge our minds to become more innovative in how we deliver children's ministry. Passion and purity into the Sunday school, that's innovation. Sunday school at Ridge Pen and ministry in the fishing village, that's innovation. Stand with these ministries. It's not just the few who will go out there in whatever way and however possible support the ministries. People should be tripping over themselves to be a part of these things. Find that the Church of Jesus it seems to be for a selected few to get into these things, while the rest of us, our lot under apostle, is just to do our duty and come on Sunday morning. Hear me by the Holy Ghost. The challenges and the realities call for more than just turning up on Sunday morning. It will call for more than just throwing your tithes, which is a misnomer. We don't throw tithes. We give it gracefully unto the Lord. So it's either we do or we die. There is no going around it. The Church of Jesus in Jamaica is at a crossroad. The church will never die because Jesus said the gates of hell will not prevail against it. But a church without children is a dead church. The children are not a part of the church of tomorrow. They must be a vital part, a vibrant, active, living part of the Church of Jesus today. I challenge us to go beyond, to put them on the agenda, to make them the agenda, to go above and beyond. Lord, show me someone else. Show me someone else that I can show kindness to. Show me how I can go beyond. Perhaps the time has come for couples to decide, instead of having 3 children of our own, we will have 2 and then adopt 1. Perhaps we need to be putting less money in fixed deposit and consider building a children's home. We have got to be radical and real if we are going to make an impact. May God help us so to do. Let us pray. Father, the problem is great. The burden is heavy. Your word is absolutely clear. We don't see examples of the men and women of God turning a blind eye, see and deaf, hear and dumb. Oh no. We see one of engagement and one where we are called, where true religion is to look after the widows and the fatherless and the orphans and the aliens and strangers. Oh God, in our time, help us to navigate. Give us wisdom. Give us courage. Give us insight to reach them, to rescue a dying generation for the glory of God. Help us to reach one more for Jesus. Amen.